All right, so today we have a review session. So ask me questions. As soon as you stop asking questions, I leave. Go. Sully.
Number 11 on fall 29.
So let's see, fall 2019, you said. Give me a moment. Desktop, Dropbox. You said number 11? Why is this being wonky? All right, so here is number 11. We want the power absorbed by the dependent source. So the dependent source is this guy right here, obviously. It has a voltage of 2 VC across it and some current that we don't know flowing through it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label this current I dependent, and I'm going to label this voltage V dependent, okay? Since we want the power absorbed, P dependent is just going to be the current I dependent times the voltage drop V dependent. Now, let's see what we have here. This current is going to be IC minus ID. So that would be 5 amps minus -2, which looks like positive 7 amps. We know that IA is positive 7 amps as well. So Kirchhoff's current law tells us that I dependent is 0. And from there, the power must be 0. So effectively, what I did is I performed KCL at this node to find the current flowing through that 5-volt source, KCL at this node to find the current flowing down. And once I recognize that that current flowing down was 0, I know that my answer has to be 0. The voltage drop doesn't matter. Next question. So I have IC is 5 amps flowing down, and I have ID is equal to -2 amps flowing up, which is the same as 2 amps flowing down, and 5 plus 2 is 7. Fantastic question. I will need to put something, actually, I'll do it right now. I need to double check my email to see exactly where Ashley has put everyone, but I want to say that it is that's not spelled correctly. The standard time exam is tonight in IESB 318. For those of you who have completed a contract with Testing and Disability Services, you will be in IESB 214, and I am going to put that information on our courses Moodle page right now. It's a very reasonable question to ask. Introduction. Announcements. Hmm. All right, next question.
Go back to the state question. How would you perform ADL, so we don't know current?
Sure, so I wouldn't be doing KVL to find the voltage V dependent in particular because the potential difference between this node here, let me erase some of this stuff. So I know that the voltage drop V dependent is just 2 VC. So I really just need to figure out what VC is. So to figure out VC, I would do KVL around this loop because I would have negative VC minus VB plus VD is equal to 0, where VB and VD are known quantities. From there, I know VC, twice VC is V dependent, and then I've gotten whatever that voltage is. Number 30, all right. So I want the KCL equation for supernode 2, 3, 11. So let's find that supernode. All right. So this big amorphous blob I've circled in purple is the supernode. So I would be adding this current plus this current plus this current plus this current together. Now, some of you may be asking yourselves why this guy isn't showing up. It does show up, but it shows up in both directions and therefore cancels each other out. So it's pointless to write it. Anytime you have a resistor in parallel with a voltage source, it's not going to show up in your KCL equation because it, by definition, those currents will wind up canceling each other out. So this should look like V2 minus V1 over 12, which is what we have right here. V2 minus V5 over 16, which is what we have right here. V2 minus V8 over 13. And V11 minus V10 over 11. There you go. Yep. Next question. Winter 2019? All right, so let's see. I'm going to use nodal analysis here. So to do that, I am going to identify some nodes. So that's one. That's two. 3. 4. And I'm going to call this one on the bottom my ground. I'm going to call this voltage VA, VB, and VC like so. So the first thing that I am going to do is express my controlling variables in terms of my nodal voltages. So I could say that IY is equal to VB minus VC over 4 ohms. Then I am going to do my voltage relationship, which says that VA is equal to 8 volts. Because my super node here, let me put a circle around it. So this is my super node, contains the ground. I won't have to write a KCL equation for that particular node. So I'll jump over here to KCL at node B. Which is going to look like VB minus VA over 7 plus VB over 3 plus 2 amps plus VA minus VC over 4. Excuse me, VB minus VC over 4. Is equal to 0, just double checking here. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4 currents leaving node B, and my equation has 4 terms, so everything is accounted for. Now we could do KCL at C. So I'm going to have this, 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 and this. So negative 2 amps plus 1.5 IY plus VC over 6 plus VC minus VB over 4 ohms is equal to 0. And what the substitution that I would make here so that I could be the absolutely laziest I could possibly be is everywhere I see, everywhere I see VA, which is literally only this place right here, replace that with 8 volts. And that way my 3 unknowns are VB, VC, and IY, and I don't have to do any more difficult substitution than that. Solve that system of equations, and I will come out with IY definitely part here in F. To get Vx, Vx is just negative VB. If I were to do mesh analysis, Vx is the voltage drop over the 3 ohm resistor, positive polarity on bottom. But I wouldn't do mesh analysis here because it's got 4 meshes. Yes, it's definitely doable if you have that one particular calculator that's capable of doing 4 equations, 4 unknowns. But my intention was for nodal analysis here. But anyway. Next question. Ryder. Mhm.
Contribution of elevate current, you like make the voltage sources short circuit.
Mhm.
You don't touch dependent sources.
That is correct. So when you are applying the principles of superposition, you can only apply it to independent sources. Dependent sources have to be left alone. Absolutely correct. Next question. What's up?
Winter 2019.
Power supplied by element B. All right, so let's look at this thing here. So if I apply Kirchhoff's current law at this node right here, I have 6 amps flowing out of the node, 10 amps flowing out of the node, which means I need 16 amps to be flowing into the node from Kirchhoff's current law, right? So I have a 16 amp up. My voltage drop, so let's see how that's going to be. I have a 9-volt drop with the same polarity as a 15-volt drop. So 9 plus 15 is 24. So I'm going to have a 24-volt drop with this polarity. And I want power supplied. So 16 times 24 is the power supplied because the current's flowing into the negative polarity terminal. So done. Next question. 28 and 29. All right. So the first thing that I would do here is I would convert my practical current source into a practical voltage source. So that would be a 6-volt source in series with that 2 ohm resistor, right? That 6-volt source and that 32-volt source have the same polarity. So I can add them together, making a 38-volt source. And this 6 ohm resistor has gone away. And I now have 7 in series with 2. So I'm going to make this look like a short circuit and call this guy 9 ohms, right? Let's see. Then I could convert from here to having an 8/9 of an amp current source direction up in parallel with a 2 ohm resistor in parallel with that 17 ohm resistor. Here's RL. Here is 14 volts. Combine my resistors in parallel. You're right. Sorry. Yes, the 9 ohm resistor. Thank you. Nine. Okay. Oh, 38. Yeah. 38 over 9. Sorry. That's what happens when I'm writing on top of the old stuff and forgetting what it is. So thank you very much for both of those things. So instead of 32, this is, or excuse me, instead of 8, this is 38. So 38 over 9. Then I can combine the 9 in parallel with the 17, go back to a practical voltage source representation, and then my 2 voltage sources are in series, combine them, and I'm effectively done. So the equivalent resistance thing here, RL is definitely going to be 9 ohms in parallel with 17 ohms. Somebody do the math and tell me if it comes out to be 5.885, but I bet it does. And then from there, for part 29, since we're going to have a practical voltage source representation, P max is going to be 1/4 Vs squared over Rs, where that Vs is what happens after I do this source transformation to bring this guy back to a voltage source and add this guy to that voltage. Okay.
Way on seeing this going on. If you change all your voltage sources to like straight wires and your current source,
So what you are describing is effectively finding the equivalent resistance of the dead network that you learned in Thevenin. And yes, that will absolutely get you the exact same result. Thevenin and Norton equivalent circuit is effectively the same. The result is the same. You're going to have a practical voltage source representation if you do a Thevenin equivalent circuit, or a practical current source representation if you're doing a Norton equivalent circuit to whatever's connected to RL. So sure, absolutely. Nothing remotely wrong with that. In fact, if they would let me, I wouldn't teach source combination anymore. I would just jump straight into Thevenin and Norton's and then tell you after the fact, hey, by the way, you can swap between these two and call it a damn day. And that's what half the textbooks do it that way, and half the textbooks explicitly go into source transformation. And for whatever reason, we chose to do source transformation by itself. So yeah, Thevenin and Norton isn't directly tested on this exam, but you can absolutely use it on questions like this to get the exact same results, potentially faster. So let's explore things here, since I didn't get to teach you guys Thevenin equivalent circuits. Nolan did it. I'm sure he did a great job, but we're just going to revisit some stuff here. Okay. So if we were trying to find the Thevenin equivalent of this, we would open circuit our resistor RL. Okay. So this guy would not exist, and then we would need to find this voltage V Thevenin, right? And we could do that any particular way that we wanted to. So for this thing right here, let's see. So we have 1, 2, just 2 nodes. Let's do nodal. Okay. So I'm going to call this VA and this VB. And we would have VA minus 32 volts over 7 ohms plus 3 amps plus VA minus VB over 2 ohms equal to 0. For node B, we would have VB minus VA over 2 ohms plus VB over 17 minus 3 amps is equal to 0. Solve, solve, solve. V Thevenin is simply VB minus 14 volts. And this V Thevenin that we just solved for is the exact same thing as this VS in this equation, because it's the voltage source in the practical voltage source representation of the circuit. Thevenin and Norton equivalent circuits get you literally the exact same result as you would get actually doing the source transformation stuff. And as Jake noticed, you could find the equivalent resistance that causes maximum power transfer to occur by, so let me erase all this jazz. If we short this, and open circuit this, let's see what we would have. So that's one node. That's a node. That's a node. So let's call this A, B, and C. We're trying to find the resistance between A and B. So directly between A and B, we have the 17 ohm resistor. Between A and C to B, we have 2, 7, So it's 17 in parallel with 9, which is, I believe, exactly what we did to get this number right here. So
On your first KCL equation, why is it EA minus 30?
okay, so let me erase some of this stuff right here. So the question is, let me erase this jazz over here. So I'm calling this node VA. And I'm calling this node B with this guy open circuited. I just want to be real clear about that, okay? If I were doing this properly, I would be calling this node down here node C because there is a node between that 7 ohm resistor and that 32 volt source. So my first equation is really VA minus VC over 7 ohms, where I know that VC is equal to positive 32 volts because the bottommost node down here I'm considering to be my reference. Did that? Yeah. So just the generic equations for them. All right. Open Dropbox engineering paper 12 sheets. So when we have a network containing multiple resistances in parallel, and we have some known current flowing in, let's call this I1, I2, and I sub n like so. The current division equation is I sub k, so this is the current flowing through the resistor that we're interested in, is equal to I known times 1 over R sub k divided by 1 over R1 plus 1 over R2 all the way out to 1 over R sub n. Yes, all of the resistors in parallel should be in the denominator, or the sum of the reciprocal of all of the resistors that are in parallel, yes. For voltage division, we have R1, R2, R sub n. We have a known voltage with this polarity. We're interested in finding the voltage drops having this particular polarity. V sub k is equal to V known times R sub k over R1 plus R2 all the way out to R sub n. So current division on top, voltage division on bottom. Pay attention to the directions of the known current as well as the currents we're looking for. Similarly, pay attention to the polarity of the known voltage as well as the voltage drop you're looking for. If either of them changes, you need a negative sign in there. Yes. It's probably the way I told you I would prefer you not to do it, and I think I warned you about that as well. So we're finding IX here. What I'm going to do is find this equivalent resistance, okay? So that is, let's call this thing right here, REQ, and that's going to be R1 plus R2 in parallel with R3, right? So for R numbers, that's going to be 4, and then R2 in parallel with R3, so that's going to be 2 times 9, 18 over 11. So 44 plus 18 is 62. Tell me if my mental math is wrong there, please. So I probably have something to the effect of IX is equal to -6 amps times R4, which is 7 ohms, over 7 ohms plus 62 over 11, where again, the assumption here is that 62 over 11 is the equivalent resistance. How I taught you guys, this would look like -6 amps times 1 over 62 over 11 over 1 over 62 over 11 plus 1 over 7 ohms. Those are actually mathematically equivalent. I very, very strongly feel that this representation is the correct one to teach you guys, because it's the resistor you want the current through in the numerator and all that kind of stuff. The thing that I have shown on bottom only works when there are 2 resistances in parallel, which is why I stopped teaching it that way. So. All right, so between C and D, so let's identify some nodes here. So obviously this guy is going to be A. Let's call this guy E for the sake of argument. C. And this guy here is both B and D, because B and D are connected by a short circuit. So if we're trying to find the resistance between C and D, I'm going to put C over here and D over here. And between C and D directly, I have the 50 ohm resistor. This 4 ohm resistor is obviously shorted out since it's connected to the same node on both sides. So I'm just going to throw that away. So I can go from C to E. And that would be the 8 ohm resistor. From E to D, I could go 13 or 5 or 34. Taking care of this guy, and this guy. And the 49 ohm resistor isn't part of a closed current carrying path here effectively, so it's not going to show up either. Or if I really wanted to, I could just say E to A is that 49 ohm resistor, but it still wouldn't actually contribute anything. And then I'd math it up.
Particular scenario.
That's the most obvious way to do it. As we get into Thevenin and Norton equivalent circuits and things like that, like I typically use nodal analysis to find Thevenin voltages because nodal analysis lets me find voltages. As I'm finding Norton currents, I tend to use mesh analysis because mesh analysis is what I use to find currents. That being said, there may be times when it's actually easier to do the opposite, and it's kind of on a case-by-case basis. How I typically work is I look for just simple KCL, KVL, and Ohm's law relationships first. Then I see if I could do current division or voltage division, and then I go to nodal and mesh. If I can avoid setting up a system of equations, I do, because that's where it's easy to fat finger a number and mess everything up. You can have the process right, but because you're entering in so many equations, there's more opportunity, in my opinion, to make a mistake. All right, so this is a single loop circuit, and we know what the current flowing through the loop is. So I can say, let me do this in red, that there is a voltage drop of 30 volts over this 10 kilo ohm resistor, a voltage drop of 15 volts over this 5 kilo ohm resistor, a voltage drop of 3 volts over this 1 kilo ohm resistor, and a voltage drop of 9 volts over this 3 kilo ohm resistor, right? And so from there, I can solve for Vx simply by writing a KVL equation around that path. And for number 19, the current flowing through the current source. So let's call this VCS. We cannot just assume it's 0. Now that I know what the Vx is, I can write a KVL equation around this loop to find the voltage drop across the current source, and then that voltage drop times the current gives me the power. You could, I think the suggestion here is, could you do this loop? And the answer is yes. KVL around any closed loop is always going to give you 0. So as long as it's, when you're, as long as, excuse me, as long as you're using any path that only contains a single unknown quantity, it doesn't really matter what that path is, it'll let you find what you're looking for. I just chose the 2 paths that I chose because I just glanced at it and said, this will work. All right, so let's erase this orange thing and this thing right here. So -15 plus 30 plus Vx plus 3 plus 9 is equal to 0. So Vx is going to be equal to 15 volts minus 30 volts minus 3 volts minus 9 volts. 15 minus 30 is -15. -15 minus 12 is -27. Finding Vx. So we say that Vx is equal to -27 volts, right? Right. Next question. Fall 2020. You said 14 and 15. I don't know how it's not the same as yours because they're this. Oh. Fall. Yeah, fall 2020. This is, oh, sorry, this is exam 2. That's the problem. All right, my bad. $14 and $15. So this is the superposition problem. So the contribution of the 4-volt source, which means I turn this off, and then I'm solving for Vx. I cannot turn off the dependent source. You can never turn off the dependent sources. So I'm going to redraw this to look a little bit cleaner here. So here's my 4-volt source. I see 7 in series with 1, so that's going to look like 8. Here's my 3 ohm resistor over which the voltage drop Vx occurs. Here's my current Ix. .4 Ix, and this is just going to be Vx. All right, so guess I would just use Kirchhoff's current law at that topmost node, right? So effectively, that's going to give me Vx prime minus 4 volts over 8 ohms, because that's the current flowing to the left through the 8 ohm resistor, plus Vx prime over 3 ohms, that's the current flowing down, minus 0.4 Ix prime, all that is equal to 0. And then Ix prime is equal to 4 volts minus Vx prime over 8 ohms. Solve that system, get Vx prime. Then I would repeat this with the 6 amp source on. So with the 6 amp source on, my voltage sources get shorted out. And I probably still, I do nodal analysis here. Let's call this bottom thing down here ground, and I'm just going to show you something real quick. So this whole thing right here is ground. And then we have this node. And then we have this node. So it's just a two equation, two unknown system that we'd be solving there. If we find this voltage, let's call this VB, this is going to be the exact same thing as Vx with respect to ground. And this is VA. So that's going to look like VA over 7 ohms plus VA minus VB over 1 ohm plus 6 amps is equal to 0. And then we would have negative 6 amps plus VB minus VA over 1 ohm plus VB over 3 ohms plus minus 0.4 Ix equal to 0. And in this case, Ix is negative VA over 7. 3 equations, 3 unknowns, solve, solve, solve. VB and Vx double prime are the same quantity. Probably. I think I copy and pasted and didn't do so. So yeah, number 1, the answers here should be I squared R. It should be V squared over R. And then it should be I times V. And I times V doesn't actually show up. I have I times R, which is not correct. So yeah, there is an error there. Power absorbed by element C. All right. So let's see what we have here. So I can say that there's 2 amps flowing in here because of the negative 2 amps flowing in the opposite direction. If I have 2 flowing up, so let's see. I'm trying to do KCL at this node in my head, but maybe I shouldn't. So let's just put this. I'm going to call this ID, where ID plus 2 amps is equal to 1 amp. The current flowing in has to equal the current flowing out. From this, ID is negative 1 amp. So That means I have 1 amp flowing this way, and therefore I have 3 amps flowing down like this. To calculate Vx, I can do a Kirchhoff's voltage law equation around this loop. So 20 is equal to 16 plus Vx, so Vx has to be equal to 4 volts. So 2Vx is 8 volts. So I have 3 amps flowing into the positive polarity terminal of 8 volts. So if I want the absorbed power, it's 24. If I want the supplied power, it's negative 24. I want it absorbed.